Hello, ladies and gentlemen. We are here on a beautiful day here in Florida with my good friend Daniel Henry for a new edition of Conversations with Rob. So for people that don't know Dan, I've known Dan for about a year now, and he's a great guy. He was the new chair of the Duval County Democrats, and that's all over. If you don't know Florida like we do, that's all over Jacksonville, up in that area. Jaguars fans surrounding that area. I'm a Patriots guy, and we're in the Super Bowl right now. I'm sorry to throw that at you, but you guys made a nice run last year.
I started off with a shady comment like that. Okay. It's
So,
Sunday. That'd be better.
sorry, I had to throw that at you a little bit. But anyway, you guys had a good year last year. You almost beat us in the conference championship, but you know what they say, close but no cigar.
Fair point. But if I was going to reverse that, I was like, you shouldn't have been in that position in the first place.
That's true. Anyways, Dan, thanks for coming on Conversations with Rob and starting the conversation with us tonight.
Happy to be here.
All right, so as we start the conversation, Dan, as the chair of the Duval County Democrats, talk about, before we get into that, why you got into politics. Was there that certain moment, talking to that certain politician, of why you got into politics? Could you tell us some more about that?
Yeah, so I think I told you this the last time I saw you. Both my parents are immigrants. They both came here from Haiti. One under Reagan, the other one over H.W. Bush. I feel like I was a Democrat in utero because just the community and my family and just the environment that I lived in, it just screamed and resonated Democratic values. So when it came to registering the vote, it really was a no-brainer as to why I registered as a Democrat. I just have distinct memories of my parents when they first got the right to vote, when they became citizens in '96, taking me to election day with them and voting every single year. So I pretty much remember every single election, frankly, because I was with my parents when they went to go vote. So it's kind of burned into my memory. But the main reason why I got involved into politics is kind of from two distinct memories. The first one is my dad trying to explain the 2000 election, which frankly was it's a little difficult when you're trying to explain recounts in Gore and Bush to a 7-year-old. But he had a good appreciation to the fact that regardless of how old we were, we really needed to know what was going on in the world that was surrounding us. Added the fact that we lived in Palm Beach County, so it was kind of the epicenter of the whole 2000 recount effort in the first place. So that was my first memory. And my second memory is 2008, when Barack Obama gets elected as president for the first time. And I was 17, so I couldn't vote for him yet. I got to vote for him the second time.
Right.
Sitting in my American government class, watching him get sworn in and realizing that the world changed in that instant. So it's one thing to see and read and learn about American history and kind of look at it from the abstract. But it's another thing to actually see someone that looks like you get elected as the president of the United States. It kind of changed the whole landscape. So that's why I like politics. I've always thought it was an avenue where people can get civically engaged and fight for and speak to issues that they're really passionate about. I'm a strong advocate for civics education and being politically aware and knowing that things are going around you, because at the end of the day, I think all citizens have a moral obligation to know about current events, to vote, to participate, because none of those things are going to stop if you decide to check out. And I'd rather be at the table making decisions and voting than not be at the table and people make decisions for me.
So as the president of the Duval Democrats, what do you do as the chair? I guess I say the president. It's really the chair.
It's synonymous. It's all good.
It's almost the same thing. It's just different words. Anyway, as the chair, what do you guys do in Duval County?
Yeah, so just for people to kind of be aware of it. So every county has a Democratic Executive Committee. It's created by statute. So we're an organization that exists by law. And what we're responsible for, other than being the official face of the Democratic Party within our county, is to get Democrats elected. So our goal in every single election cycle is to have a ground game set up for our candidates to be successful. So regardless of whether or not it's a statewide election that we had this past November, or if it's municipal elections that we have going on right now, our elections for countywide is this March. We're responsible for putting in the resources and the footwork to knock on doors, canvass, phone bank. So that's why we exist. As chair, I'm mainly responsible for leading that effort and delegating. Raising money is the other half of it, which is the fun part that I'm going to have to get used to. But it comes with a lot of responsibility, but it makes it easier when you have a good team behind you that's helping you out.
So, as being in Duval County, let's just even go back to a little bit of the 2018 election that just passed us. Now, we had some big races here in the state of Florida. Obviously, every race is a big race because it's, all government, and the government takes care of the people's needs. But we had a big race as the governor's race. The Senate race, the Florida Senate race, both went to recounts along with the agricultural race. Now, working inside the Duval Democratic Party, we saw Andrew Gillum win Duval County by, 2 or 3 percentage points?
4 percentage points.
4 percentage points, okay. And also Bill Nelson winning that. What did you guys see in 2018 that worked in that election that didn't work in the past elections, where Democrats have, kind of been gaining ground in Duval County, but still not winning the county? So what do you attribute to that success of 2018 and winning that county?
So
Democrats.
Yeah. It's about telling a story, to be quite frank. 2016 was the first indication, I think, statewide and nationally and locally, that Jacksonville was slowly turning purple and now blue. The best way I can explain that is Democrats hold a voting advantage in Duval County by about 30 or 40,000 votes. But our voters don't always do a good job about showing up to the polls. So even though we have a voter registration advantage, it doesn't always translate to winning electorally. And in the 2016 election between Hillary and Trump, we had a record amount of people vote. Our voter participation was about 80%. Wow. And Hillary Clinton came within 5,000 votes of winning the county. And I cannot express how much of an improvement that is because Democrats always end up losing, regardless of whether or not it's a statewide candidate or national candidate, losing Duval usually by double digits or high single digits. And getting that type of vote tally in 2016, besting even Barack Obama in both of his 2008 and 2012 elections, was really the moment when a lot of people started to realize that, hey, there may be something here. So we realized pretty early on that if we were going to turn Duval blue in the 2018 election, it was going to be tough. The odds weren't in our favor. It's a midterm election, so traditionally you have a low voter turnout. Back in 2014, the last midterm election we had here in Duval County, the voter turnout was about 45%. This time around, our voter turnout was 65%. So it was kind of in two-pronged ways how we got there. The first one is we had an amazing candidate at the top of the ticket that can't go without being noticed. He really inspired a lot of people. He spent a lot of time in Jacksonville. A lot of people started to joke around that Jacksonville was his second home. But he put in the work to actually be very visible in our community. So it was really helpful for our base voters to know that they had a really exciting and great candidate at the top of the ticket. So that was the first reason. The second reason is we put in a major effort in our ground game to canvass to knock on doors, to phone bank, and particularly to register people to vote by mail. And that was the major push that we did even before we knew who our Democratic candidate was going to be in the governor's election, because we knew the only way we were going to win is if we encouraged those Democrats who vote in presidential elections but don't vote in midterm elections. And changing that voter behavior is very difficult, particularly when you have the party and candidates spending millions of dollars over the course of decades to try to change that behavior. And one opportunity that we saw that was encouraged a lot at the state level was registering these voters to vote by mail. And the final results really showed that, because when we identify that as a warm Democrat. So essentially you vote in presidential elections and you ignore all the other elections. And when we were looking at the tendencies for them to vote in this last past election, warm Democrats in our county, if they were registered to vote by mail, voted at an 85% rate. But if they weren't registered to vote by mail, and we just basically had contacted them and knocked on their door and gotten lots and lots of text messages and calls, then they voted at a 45% rate. So getting those Democrats that don't traditionally vote to change their behavior was key to putting us over the finish line. So trying different methods to get to that point, along with our ground game, was key to making sure that we got the result that we had. And it was great, because the last time, just to kind of put a bow on it, the last time a Democrat won Duval County was Lawton Childs. So it's the first time that Duval's turned blue for a countywide candidate since in 36 years.
And that was the last time a Democrat won the governor's race in the state of Florida.
Yeah, this is a bit of irony with that too. Yeah.
So, but basically what you said, and this leads me into the next question of the lessons from 2008. And you talked about the ballot and mail-in ballots, and a lot of you guys pushed that. And I've seen even the Democratic Party here in Polk County and in Orange and Osceola too push
Statewide.
Yeah, statewide, push that. But now, and this goes into the lessons.
Yeah.
And we've talked about this before. You see what happened in Miami-Dade with they had the bomb threats at the mail center, and over 2,000 some odd, give or take, so many votes didn't register at all. That should have registered. We see other absentee issues in Palm Beach and Broward where votes didn't count. We see ballot design issues. But to go back to the mail-in, how would you address that and say, hey, so say to me, I'm an absentee voter, and you say, hey, vote absentee, and I say, gee, look what happened in 2018 with all the shenanigans at the mail place and the shenanigans in Palm Beach County and Broward County and the recounts, and why should I mail in? I feel more comfortable going to the polling place and voting in person, and at least I feel somewhat secure that the vote went into the machine. I mean, we can never, unless we get a paper trail, to be honest, we can never really say the vote 100% counted.
Yeah. So,
but go ahead.
No, push back on you a little bit. Okay. So this is the way that we kind of think about it, at least for me, because I'm one of those reluctant voters. I have always early voted. I've never voted by mail up until this past election. I figured if I was going to be preaching people to actually register to vote by mail, I should too.
Right.
So I did it myself to kind of get the experience for myself. And but to your question, it's a different conversation that you're having, because when we were targeting people to vote by mail, we were targeting Democrats that don't usually vote. We're not talking to the super voter that no matter what, you can depend on them showing up to vote on election day or early vote. That's not an audience. So I'm not trying to change that voting behavior because you've shown consistently that you're going to vote. I'm trying to change the voter behavior of a well-meaning Democrat that just doesn't vote in midterm elections. Those are the Democrats I need to reach. And the strategy that's been in the past that Republicans have done a really good job of, that we have started to catch up on, is they have signed up millions of their voters to vote by mail. And they vote consistently. It's almost very religious to them. They get their vote by mail ballot, they vote down the line, They mail it back in same day or that same week, and they're good to go. When it comes to our voters, particularly ones that aren't registered to vote by mail, but don't vote in midterm elections, they usually sit it out. And if we can create an environment where we make it easy for you, you get it at home, you can vote at your convenience. It's almost like an insurance policy. We had a lot of people that were registered to vote by mail that frankly just used it as a sample ballot and went and voted on election day or early voted. A lot of people don't know you can do that. You always have the option of deciding not to cast your vote by mail ballot and voting in person. That's always an option available to you. And the last thing I want to say about that is voting by mail is the only way that you can vote in this state where you can see a real-time tracking of when your vote got placed into the system, whether or not it got tabulated, and whether or not it counted. When you vote in person, it's great. You fill it out, you put it into the machine. Sometimes you get a sticker, sometimes you get a receipt, and that's it. You don't know what happened to it after that. Voting by mail is the only way you'll actually know real time, checking online what the status of your ballot is and whether or not it's counted and remedying that. The second you put your ballot into a machine and you vote on election day, that's it. You can't cure it. You don't really have an opportunity for you to do anything with it. So for all you know, your vote didn't count because instead of bubbling in the box, you put an X. And the canvassing board decided that your voter intent wasn't to vote for a particular candidate, and you'll never know whether or not that was your ballot. So yes, it's gotten a lot of bad press. Obviously, the issues that happened with vote by mail have been really spread out there and been bandied about a lot, particularly in the news and on social media about the problems that they had. But when you look at the actual ballots cast, and I can speak to Duval County because that's where we did our work. When you look at the actual ballots cast compared to the ballots that had issues, it's less than 1% that had any problems.
Full disclosure, I vote by mail too, and I'm gonna keep voting by mail. But I had to throw that at you because it does, even for a person that votes by mail.
Yeah.
And likes what you said with the tabulation, it still does make you think about things with the shenanigans. But that's voting in general, that there's shenanigans.
When it comes down to voter education, and it's funny, during the recount, it was a perfect example for people to get a real view as to some of the issues that the canvassing boards in their particular counties will have issues with their ballots, because it comes down to voter education. A lot of people, sad to say, can't cast their ballots correctly or don't fill it out correctly. So those are usually the major issues that people have or canvassing boards have when they throw out people's ballots, is because they haven't voted it correctly.
Right.
So educating voters as to how they cast their ballot and making sure that they fill in their races correctly and making sure that there's no question to their intent when they vote is really what we need to do moving forward.
So to talk about the lessons more.
Yeah.
This is kind of a brief thing. I mean, we saw Andrew Gillum only lose by 32 some odd thousand votes. We saw Bill Nelson lose by, I think it was 10,000 some odd votes.
Right.
We see Nikki Fried win her recount. What are the lessons for the Democratic Party in Florida to learn from 2018 to use? I mean, there's no big elections for the state of Florida in 2020 besides the presidential.
That's a huge race.
We do have House and Senate races.
Yeah.
They have to learn these lessons. So what are the lessons from 2008 besides the voting issues?
Well, I really do think that 2000 is an important election, particularly for Florida. And I say that because Donald Trump can't win without winning Florida. It makes it almost mathematically impossible. He won Florida by less than 1%. He won Pennsylvania by less than 1%. He won Michigan and Wisconsin by less than 1%. He has no path to victory without coming through Florida. So if we do our job and ensure that we deny him our electoral votes, it makes it really difficult for him to make it up in the other places in the country. But to your question, I think the party needs to do a better job when it comes to having a ground game ready for a post-election day. After the primary, it already makes the job a little bit difficult because we have late primaries in this state. So we don't really know who our candidate's going to be and what the apparatus is going to look like, frankly, until the last week of August, first week of September. So it doesn't give you a lot of time, particularly at the county and state level, to kind of set up your ground game as to what should be happening. So, frankly, they didn't hire their full set of field organizers until mid-September. We really didn't know what the targets were going to be until late September. So it didn't really give a lot of opportunities for particular counties across the state to really have their ducks in order for them to run an effective campaign. And filling in that gap, which is why local parties are really important, they're the ones that are really responsible for setting up the ground game. So it makes that transition really easy when the state candidates and national candidates come in. And Duval did a really good job, if I'm going to pat ourselves on the back, of setting up an infrastructure that was ready to go post-primary, that we didn't really have to wait for who the nominee was going to be or who the nominee was going to be, because we had our ducks in a row. We were prepared. Some counties can say that, some can't, but it really makes it difficult for you to have an effective ground game if you don't have your targets in place, your field organizers in place. You can have a great candidate, you can have a charismatic candidate that everyone loves and everyone's really excited for, but if the next day people are asking for lit or for bumper stickers or for t-shirts, and you can't give them that until the next month, it doesn't really show an effective strategy of getting people out to vote. Because what we've learned, particularly in midterm elections, is if you don't talk to voters and you don't mobilize them, they're just not going to vote. You really have to touch them. Jacksonville is a great example of that. We really had to talk to our voters in order for them to get out to vote. That's the only way we've been able to move them from a 45% voter turnout rate to a 75% voter turnout rate just for Democrats in these past two midterm elections. And when you look at the Republicans, Ron DeSantis, he wasn't really a charismatic candidate. In Jacksonville, he didn't really have a lot of events. But Republicans still showed out at 80%. So it's a perfect example of us having to realize that regardless of whoever their candidate is, they're going to vote for them.
Right.
It doesn't matter whether or not they're a charismatic candidate or a second candidate. They're going to vote, and it's incumbent on us to make sure that our voters come out, because we're not always going to have a really charismatic candidate at the top of the ticket. So that's where the ground game really comes in, and it's really important.
So as the chair of the Duval County Democrats, and I know you said you guys did a lot of work, and you guys did win that county with Gillum and Nelson. Nikki Fried won too, the county?
She did. She skipped
it.
The three.
Okay. So those three people winning that is big for Duval. And I know you said there was a lot of good lessons. But as the chair, what do you have that maybe you think could have been done better as the chair? And do you have any new plans that you're going to implement to try to get even more of a big ground game for House and Senate races in the county, and also for the presidential race in 2020?
Yeah, so starting early is really key. Mm-hmm. One thing we learned fairly quickly is if you're trying to set up a GOTV plan in the last couple of weeks before an election, you're not going to win. It's just not going to happen. That's my first take on it. My second take on it is you got to make sure that you know who your voters are. Different races are going to have different types of electorates. More people show up for presidential elections than they do in midterm elections. It's just the political system that we work in. So identifying the voters that you need to reach very early, and then making sure that you're doing constant contact to them is really important. But moving on into the future, if we really want to keep this momentum, I think it's recognizing the level of investment that you need to do in a particular area in order for you to be successful. We were lucky because we had a lot of third-party groups that were in Jacksonville that were doing the same things that we were doing. We had For Our Futures, we had New Florida Majority, we had the Gillum campaign, we had the coordinated campaign. Some of us could work together, some of us couldn't because of political status, but a lot of us were hitting the same areas and doing a lot of the work that we all needed to do in order to reach out to voters. And if I learned anything from that experience is, particularly when you have a lot of candidates on the ballot, is working in a coordinated effort. And because a lot of experience that people have in Jacksonville when it comes to elections is you have 20 different candidates, so you have 20 different campaigns, and everyone's doing their own thing. And whenever that happens, then we always lose. So recognizing that we need to work together is really important. And if I had one criticism for the coordinated campaign, I would say that they did a great job highlighting the top of the ticket. They could have done a better job when it came to highlighting down ballot.
Right.
A lot of important House races in Jacksonville, one of which had a real chance of being able to flip from a Republican seat to a Democratic seat. That's Tracy Paulson.
Right.
And she was an amazing candidate. She had the resources. She had the connections. She was just awesome. So she carried her race herself. But not everyone's Tracy Paulson. And when you are a candidate and running in a Republican seat, where traditionally the Republican wins by 10, 20 points, and you have to be the one that's building in the resources for yourself and raising the money for yourself, you don't always get the attention that you need in order for you to be relevant and for you to get the support that you need. And I think if we could go back and change anything, it's making sure that the down ballot races got as much attention as to everyone else, because in this county you can have Gillum win by 16,000 votes and everyone gets to vote for him countywide, but we have a tax collector's race where everyone gets to vote in that same race, and it's not down ballot that much. It's probably like 2-3 races below the governor's race, and that's Mia Jones, and she loses by 1,000 votes.
Wow.
So just because people vote at the top of the ticket doesn't always mean that it resonates down ballot. So if we want to be effective in the future and build the bench that we desperately need in order for us to have Democratic leaders that are ready to step up and ready to move up the ladder, we have to put a lot of more emphasis in down ballot races, because right now we don't do that. Everyone focuses at the top, but they never focus at everyone under them, and that's to their disadvantage.
So I do want to get into some Florida issues with you before we move on to a couple of national things and end the interview. So first of all, we've seen Ron DeSantis come out of the gate and suspend Steve Israel, Susan Booker, and a school superintendent in Okaloosa County.
Yeah.
Now Susan Booker just resigned because she said, "Hey, I was a minority leader in the Florida State Senate. I'm not going to get a fair shot." And she ended up resigning. And I have actually met Susan Booker. I thought she was doing a decent job. And, you know, as a person that deals with elections like you do, we've seen like the funding at the elections board offices, and they're not the greatest. So the machines are not the greatest. And we've seen that in the recount too, that, you know, to get the timelines.
Really depends on the county you're talking about. Like some counties, Broward and Palm Beach obviously had more difficulty when it came to their recounts, but ours were relatively smooth. We did have a couple incidents where the tabulation machines weren't counting all the ballots when they ran them through the machine, so they had to recount them after a certain point. But comparing that to some of the troubles that some other counties had, it wasn't the same. So it really depended on the county that you lived in and the SOE that you had. I'm not saying that to say that our SOE is awesome and great, because frankly, a lot of times I'm banging my head over the on the wall sometimes because he can be very difficult, particularly in our county. But that being said, our recount was not as dramatic as some other counties experienced.
Well, let's talk about, so with Ron DeSantis going in and doing those three things right out of the box, then he came out good with some environmental news, said about the red tide, that he was going to have formed some big task force and put so many, I think, $5 or $6 billion into getting rid of the red tide.
We see how he funds it because
that's right. We're going to see where the money comes from.
Exactly, because if he finds the money that he's going to fund these issues by cutting somewhere else,
right,
that's really important to the state, then that doesn't really solve anyone's problems.
That's true. So with that said, in those three things, those three things happen, and plus that was some of the big things that happened so far since he's taken office. What is your take on Ron DeSantis? I mean, I know it's a wait-and-see thing. He's only been in office for about a month now, but he has done some things so far that now he got rid of Common Core today. That's what he says. He's going to go and get rid of Common Core. So he's done these things, suspending also the Water Management District in South Florida. Now, that could be with some of the contention that he had with Rick Scott. But we'll see what happens with that. But he's done quite a few things since he's gotten to office. What's your take on Ron DeSantis so far?
I learned a long time ago never to trust Ron DeSantis. His career in Congress showed, frankly, in my opinion, that he's not to be trusted. But that being said, I think, in my opinion, he's recognized that he was not obviously elected with a great majority. Frankly, if you look at the vote totals and how people voted, he won by 30,000 votes, but 50% of the state voted for someone else. So that doesn't really set you up to say that you were elected with a mandate and the people are on your side. So I've seen him kind of trying to shift to the middle on some issues. You've seen that with Common Core. You've seen that with medical marijuana. You've seen that on some environmental issues. Those are the places where I feel that he's tried to display himself as someone who's not as partisan as he came out during the election. But then you go back and he exhibits behaviors that aren't necessarily center. He appoints a Secretary of State who has to resign because of blackface. He suspends local officials, which frankly, in my opinion, is not true to the democratic process. But I have a story as to why I have that opinion. And he presents a budget, frankly, today that was inadequate in dealing with a lot of the issues that a lot of voters cared about, particularly when it came to Medicaid expansion and education. So my approach to him is to watch everything that he does, because depending on the issue, he may be on a different place in the political scale, and that just leads me to believe that he's making decisions based on what he thinks people will like about him to kind of improve his numbers. And we'll see what kind of chief executive he is. I guess he's within his first 60 days, so a lot can happen. But if Governor Scott is an indication, you just have to see what kind of actions he does over the course of his term. So if I was going to give a grade, I would say it's too close and too soon to call.
Right. Well, the thing is that gets me, and the thing that you did bring up with the Mike Ertz, the guy that resigned with about the blackface.
Yeah.
I was told by quite a few people that I talked to that he was very unbiased, and he would have been a decent Secretary of State as a Republican, and he was very fair. So then he does, that comes out, he resigns, which is fair. But then they put in, I don't know who this lady is, there was somebody that apparently was one of his running mates.
No.
Was going to be one of his running mates.
Yeah.
Was on the list. And then we go from somebody that at least ran elections to somebody that's a judge that, who knows what the heck she knows about elections.
It's a key point. And it's not to say that she is qualified or is perfectly capable as an attorney. Obviously, she's reached the position of a judge, so that comes with some level of consideration. But you're right, has absolutely no election experience, let alone running a local elections office. Now she's in charge of an entire state as electoral system. She's going to be very dependent on staff and policy people to make her decisions. We're obviously very concerned about how the state is going to implement Amendment 4. Right. And having someone at the helm that doesn't have any kind of policy or electoral experience running this type of important position is very concerning, particularly when they're the spouse of a prominent Republican state senator. So I'm not on the inside. I don't know when that politics were to play in that type of decision. But what I have seen, particularly between these two secretaries of state, is obviously the transition team is not doing a very good job vetting its candidates. And if this issue was able to be found by the local journalists that obviously wrote this story, it makes you question what kind of vetting the governor's staff did when they appointed him, regardless of whether or not he's been a good or effective supervisor. Because there's plenty of people that are great people, awesome people that may seem that they have an unblemished record, but if you really don't do a deep dive, particularly for these type of important positions, obviously something can come out of the closet and haunt you.
Well, that's what it is. You go from Ken Detzner, who was the previous one, and he didn't know anything about elections. Then you put in a guy that knows something about elections, but did something bad in the past, and then he goes out, and then you put in another person that doesn't know anything about elections. So it's just one vicious circle. But the thing that worries me, Dan, is that with this person coming into the elections board for the state, we've seen the Brenda Snipes issue down there, and then putting Rick Scott putting in one of his cronies in there, and then now Susan Booker is resigned. So now Ron DeSantis, I believe, can appoint somebody to the Palm Beach County seat, if I'm correct with that. So now it's almost like, how is Trump not going to win the state unless it's for an overwhelmingly Democratic vote? Because it almost feels like the fix is in already in Florida. I'm just being honest. That's my opinion. I'm not trying to put you on the spot.
Oh, no, you're good. And I will use our local elections for this. It's a great example, particularly since you talked about the suspension. If anyone's under any illusion that Republicans in this state are willing to do anything and go one step further to win, they are seriously misguided. And I say that because we had a perfect example of that locally. So we had two city council members in our county, and Jacksonville's consolidated, so our city council is the equivalent of a county commission. But two of our city councilors get indicted, and Governor Scott suspends them. Hard to argue against that, right? Mm-hmm. So in their place, he appoints, and there's one person in particular that we have as a party had bones about. Both these are Democrats. Both of them represent minority access districts that are overwhelmingly Democratic, overwhelmingly African American. One of the people that he appoints is a Republican that lives 20 miles away from that district, and that doesn't establish residency until 2 or 3 days after he's appointed, and a day before he gets sworn in. And to say that's not political theater, it's hubris at best. Particularly that the person that they appointed is someone who ran for state house in a different district that's nowhere near this one, who was the council aide to then the council president at the time, who's a major Republican. And the one central nexus between all of these individuals is Governor Scott and our current incumbent, Mayor Lenny Curry, who, by the way, happens to be the former chair of the Republican Party of the state of Florida, who helped get Scott get reelected. So if anyone's has this idea that Lenny Curry did not pick up the phone and say, "I want you to appoint this person," because Scott doesn't know this person from nowhere, to this position, so I can guarantee that I have a state vote in city council, they have another thing coming to them. And to add more insult to injury, this incumbent, Terrence Freeman, really came into office and he said, I'm dedicated to this community. I just moved here, but I'm really passionate about dealing with local issues that really matter, regardless of whether or not I'm a Republican. And I'm going to focus on the kitchen table issues, and local politics shouldn't be as partisan. And because potholes are not Democratic potholes or Republican potholes, they're potholes. He kind of comes in through this mantra. 6 months later, January, which is qualifying for our local elections, instead of running for re-election in the seat that he said that he was dedicated to serve, he decides to run for an at-large seat.
Right.
So we were saying at the time, and the way our kind of at-larger seats set up is the whole county gets to vote for you, but you have to live in a geographic area for you to represent it.
Right.
The geographic area that he lives in was always within that at-large seat that he's now running for. So having incumbent next to his name, or saying that he's a city council member, obviously gives him a leg up when it comes to obtaining that at-large seat. And the mayor that we have has shown a propensity of setting up the chessboard for his candidates to win in these elections. So I say all of this to say, to kind of bring it back home, that Republicans, to their credit, do a very good job of lining up candidates,
Right.
Building a bench, funneling them money, and getting them elected. And it creates this vicious cycle of, frankly, unqualified candidates that run for these offices against Democrats and win, because they've created, in essence, a machine to continually get them elected. And I don't say that to discourage people about the political process or our chances to win, because I think we can win. But it goes back to what I'm saying before. In order for us to win, we really need to motivize our voters to get to the election booths. And that comes with great candidates, but that also comes with putting in the ground game to actually get them to vote. And that's the only way we're going to be able to win in 2020, is if we're able to replicate those same type of plans and movements for the upcoming election.
So gearing back into 2020, and just to go back at you with that, like I said, the thing that worries me is you got Rick Scott appointing his crony to Broward County, which one of the biggest, if not the biggest, Democratic stronghold in the state. And then you go to Palm Beach, Booker retires, and now DeSantis can put whoever the heck he wants in there. So you got two of the strongest, most Democratic counties in the state are going to be controlled by Republican state of election officers, rather. So it's scary. I don't know. Maybe it's not.
But it's scary. But one thing I have faith in, particularly in South Florida, is you have a very visible, educated, energized Democratic base. And if any of those two current office holders that happen to be Republicans in strongly Democratic counties think that they're going to be able to pull the wool over anyone's eyes, they have another thing coming. So it's making sure that people are vigilant about the decisions that they make, and are cognizant of the issues that we're dealing with for the next year and a half before we have an election. We can ensure that although they may be Republicans and control those county offices, that they don't make decisions that have a negative effect on our voters and our voters as a whole.
So I have two questions on 2020, all right, for you.
Wow.
First of all...
Don't get me in trouble.
First of all, no, they won't. First of all, what kind of candidate do you believe can beat Trump in 2020?
someone that can speak to the better angels of this country. I think we have gotten to a place in the political discourse where we villainize our neighbors, we villainize segments of the population. We've created an environment that essentially says that these group of people are the reason why I can't get a job or I don't have health care or in my opinion, the country is going in a negative turn. And if we have a candidate, at least on our side, that speaks to our better angels, that galvanizes our voters, that inspires our voters, that brings us all together and brings us in as a coalition, I think that's the way we're going to be able to win. And it's really speaking to issues that voters care about. We saw that in the midterm election, particularly when we talked about the U.S. House, and a simple majority was focusing on education, focusing on healthcare, focusing on the economy, focusing about jobs, things that affect people's daily lives. And if we get to a state or a race where we're not talking about the issues and it's just about personalities, then we're not going to be able to win, and people are just going to tune that out.
So, with that said, with so many Democrats and progressives running for president in 2020, some being more progressive than others, to be honest, after the primary, the candidate, how do we get, that candidate and the other people that ran, everybody to, sing Kumbaya? We know that didn't happen in 2006. It did happen somewhat, but we did lose some people with the shenanigans, in my opinion, that happened in 2016 with the Sanders-Clinton matchup. So how do we get everybody together? I know that you're probably going to say, well, we got to beat Trump, but besides Trump, how do we get everybody together?
That's not what I'm going to say.
Okay.
I looked at, when you look at the 2008 primary and the 2016 primary, they're similar and they're different at the same time. Both of those elections have changed candidates, Obama being the change candidate in 2008, and unfortunately Trump being the change candidate in 2016. But what really made those primaries different, especially when it comes to unifying the party, the person that loses has an obligation to ensure that the voters that were behind them the entire election bring them to the table, but it's also incumbent on the person that wins to really include those voters that didn't vote for them and make them feel that they're appreciated and loved, and that regardless of whether or not the election didn't go their way, that we're all on the same team. And when I look at the partnership that Barack and Hillary made together after the primary, you would almost seem that they were symbiotic, that they both appreciated the race that they were in and the consequences if they didn't come together. And they really put a big effort in joining both of their factions in one united ticket and one united party, to the point that you had a lot of people asking if they should be on the same ballot together. And that was a true representation of the fact that people really saw them kind of come together. You had some of that in the 2016 election between Hillary and Bernie, but you could feel it wasn't the same. It was almost a forced marriage, to be quite frank. And
but just to interrupt you, Dan, I have to do this, and I'm sorry because I don't like to interrupt people. We did have I think it was the Pumas that said, I think that's what they were called.
We did.
For the Hillary voters that said they wouldn't vote for Obama and this and that and all that jazz, as we had for the people with Bernie that weren't Hillary supporters. Yeah. So I agree with you with the Hillary and Obama seem more in sync than maybe Bernie. But Bernie did go out there, to be fair, and he did for Hillary and try to get the voters out.
Yeah, I'm not saying that he didn't. I'm not giving that impression.
So it was kind of both ways with the Pumas and the Bernie people.
But I will say one thing. This election was definitely different between those 2 years because there was one difference that we had more of now than we did before, and that's social media.
Sure.
Social media made a huge difference in the 2016 election because even though we had Facebook and Twitter and Instagram in 2008, it wasn't as big of a platform for political discourse and for people to share their political views. And that's the good and bads of having social media like that, because it's great because people get to share their opinions and share their views, and it's an open source type of platform where people can discuss and debate.
Russia couldn't steal the election in 2008. Damn.
Listen. In 2016, it also gave a lot of people a platform to not unify, to show division, and to bring out our differences. And I'm not saying social media was a cause for disunity within the party. Obviously, we have demons that we have to deal with as an organization as a whole. But it certainly didn't help. So when you said earlier whether or not we're going to have that kumbaya moment in 2020, it's really going to be dependent on, frankly, the winner and the loser at that convention, because they're going to have the responsibility of bringing the party together. Only they're going to be able to do that and bring their supporters together. And that's why the race that we run and the type of statements and campaign that these candidates have during this cycle, because it's off to the races now that you have everyone announcing for president practically every day now. What they say really matters. Your voice and your statements matter. And I hope a lot of these candidates realize that when they talk, people really listen. And if we start off in type of environment where we sow division and say that this person is a bad Democrat or that person's a bad Democrat or you're not a real Democrat, it kind of leads us away from a conversation about ideas and different philosophies and values to one that's about personality and bad political discourse.
Well, two questions, and I know that was supposed to be the last one, but two things came out within the past couple of days before I was studying up for this interview. The first thing, we've seen Howard Schultz come out and say that he's probably going to run as an independent, which probably, I believe that if you have the right Democratic candidate, it won't hurt the Democrats, period. Because if you look at the way Howard Schultz is, he's more of a country club Republican guy, so he might get the never Trumpers to vote for him. Maybe he'll get a couple of Democratic people that are more to the right, not more to the center left. But I don't believe that will hurt. But quick thing, I'd love to hear what you think about Howard Schultz maybe dipping his toes in.
Okay. Putting me in the fire on this one. Howard Schultz, when it comes to his tenure at Starbucks and the type of executive he has a lot of progressive bona fides that he can speak to. He gave his employees free access to education when it comes to paying for tuition. He gave full-time and part-time employees not free, but really subsidized healthcare. He gave his employees at least a 15 an hour minimum wage. He did a lot of things that a lot of progressive and frankly the Democratic Party encourages businesses to do, particularly large ones that have a large amount of employees that work for them. But I hate to get into the political environment that basically, if I am someone who is very wealthy, or a celebrity, or a social figure that has never run a government, never ran for office, never put yourself in a position where you're accountable to voters, and you decide to run for president, in my opinion, that's not the best track record. I'm not to say I'm not saying that you need to be a politician in order to run for president, but that's not what I'm trying to get at. But there's something to be said about government service and political experience. And I think a lot of the issues that we have now in government, particularly with the president that we have, other than his personalities and him being woefully underqualified and not having the right temperament, is because he doesn't know how to relationship build. He doesn't know how the government works. He doesn't know the customs and the norms that he should be upholding as a president. And I'm not saying that Howard Schultz can't learn that or will have a better temperament than Donald Trump. He may very well be that. But I think moving forward, we need to get to a place where when you have candidates that run for president, they really understand the importance and the power and the responsibility that comes along with the job. And I don't think that executive experience as a CEO of a Fortune 500 really translates into that type of experience because, frankly, executives are accountable to their board of directors and their shareholders, and they can make decisions based on them signing a pen to a piece of paper. And they're more agile, and they can make shifts depending on the market and their customer base and the type of business that they have. You don't have that luxury in politics. You really have to get the backing of the electorate and politicians and advocacy groups and a whole array of different constituency groups that are really important in order for you to get maybe an inch worth of progress. So it's a completely different game.
Right.
And on his electability, it just depends on what type of candidate or campaign he wants to run. But I will say this: he's not going to have a very good shot of winning if he's demonizing candidates on our side that are advocating for issues that our base cares about. And if he truly wants to build the type of coalition that he needs in order for him to be effective and in order for him to run a campaign that galvanizes the country to do something it hasn't done in 200 years, but for someone who's not party affiliated, he really has to come out of that gate and really serve people. And right now, I don't see that.
No thanks. We already had one businessman. One's enough. No thanks.
Yeah.
My opinion, not yours.
He should run for mayor. He should run. He has Governor Enzi in Washington is term limited. He's not running for re-election. He should run for governor, or he should run for mayor of Seattle. Or there's plenty of other different levels where he can get politically involved within the small corner of the world that he lives, and he doesn't need to shoot for the top job.
Yeah, no thanks. I'm good. Anyway, my last question before we move on to some fun questions. Bernie Sanders said he's going to run for president. That came out within the past week. He has not made his formal announcement. Joe Biden, still nothing. Why are we still waiting for Joe and Bernie to make the big announcement?
Both of them don't have to. They have large constituency groups. They have large name ID. They're not going to have an issue raising money. So, frankly, they don't have to get out there really early to try to make their case. And if I was being tactical when it comes to both of their campaigns, because they're two different types of candidates, it's better to have a lot of these new people that are just getting on the national stage announce first and try to make their case. And if they burn out really quick or they have lasting power, you'll be able to see that. And if I'm Bernie Sanders or if I'm Joe Biden, I don't necessarily need to do that same thing because the country has a pretty good idea as to who I am.
So you think that's a good move in your opinion so far?
I think if I was on either one of their campaigns, I would probably give this advice.
Okay. All right, so let's move on to some fun questions. One hard-hitting question, well, maybe two. We'll see how you answer these. You don't have to give me this answer. We can rephrase this a little bit. Who do you believe the 2020 favorite is? Or, if you don't want to answer that, Who is your favorite for 2020? Now, I know you're with the party, so you may have to stay neutral.
I can't answer that second one because of that very reason. I cannot.
Yeah, so let's answer the first one. Who do you believe is the favorite?
Right now, I think it's three people. I think it's Joe Biden, Bernie Sanders, and Kamala Harris.
Okay, thank you for that. Who is your favorite politician? Now, this might be a tough one for you. Maybe not. And don't say Hillary.
Do they have to be liberal?
It could be anything. I'm just joking.
Hillary. You know what? Before I answer your question,
I got love for Hillary.
No. I love Hillary, and it's not for the typical reason I think it's most people think. My parents obviously were not of means. They were both immigrants. They were both nursing assistants, so they barely made above minimum wage. So my dad worked two jobs. My mom worked one job. They kind of had to alternate between night shifts and day shifts. And they did not shield me away from the realities of the life that we were living. I still have distinct memories of my dad showing me his checkbook and his paycheck and the bills that we had and showing me what we had left and what we could and couldn't do. So I always had a full appreciation to the reality to what you need to do in order for you to survive. But that being said, one of the things that really helped them was CHIP. That was the only way they were going to be able to afford health insurance because the employer-sponsored insurance that both of them had to cover me and my brother were just ridiculously too expensive. And CHIP was the only way they were able to afford it. They had Florida's version of that was Florida Kid Care. They only had to pay $25 each for both of us in order for us to have insurance up until we were 18. And it covered pretty much everything with a low deductible. So if it wasn't for CHIP, I probably wouldn't have insurance when I was a kid. And that was one of the seminal programs that Hillary got enacted into law. So
Hillary used to be real progressive. I just think she lost a little bit of her progressive swagger, but that's just my opinion. The ranks, but I used to be a Hillary guy too, but I evolved, and that's fair. I voted for her. Full disclosure.
So that's why I like her. That's the my favorite politician. It would have to. So this is gonna be funny. I really admire President Johnson because he was able to marry a progressive agenda and have the political capital and the political will to actually get it passed. And when I look at politics, I think politicians have not only a moral obligation, but frankly a civic obligation to ensure that the policies that they advocate for pass, because you're building a relationship and you're building that level of trust with the voters that are electing you. So if you tell voters you're going to do something, you better do it. And you have a plan and the political capital in order for you to achieve it. And when you look at President Johnson and the fact that he was able to get the Civil Rights Act passed, the voting rights passed, Medicare, Medicaid, Head Start, all of the New Deal type deals that he was able to get passed and create the great society that he always talks about. Those things weren't done because he just had great ideas and he had it on a piece of paper. He knew what he needed to do and the politicians he needed to talk to in order for him to pass his agenda. And a lot of times I think that kind of gets lost in the conversation because it's great to talk about all the ideas that you have and all the things that you want to do. But if you can't achieve it, it's kind of worthless. So that's why I like President Johnson. He was able to be a giant progressive and liberal lion, but still be able to go in there into Washington and actually get his agenda passed all at the same time.
All right, so that's good. I like President Johnson too. I'm a Kennedy guy. Johnson, I like him too. Anyway, what's your favorite color, Dan, for all the viewers?
Blue, but that's easy though.
Blue, same here. What's your favorite music and artist? That's the last question.
I have an eclectic type of taste for music, so I pretty much like anything. More often than not, I'm listening to like top 40 stuff. But if there was one artist I could listen to my entire life and never get sick of them, it's Adele. I just really love her music. I feel like I'm one of the original Adele fanatics and fans. I knew her and I was listening to her music before she was even a thing, and I just love her voice. So that's my favorite artist.
And that's pretty much our last question. I thought you were going to say Trump for favorite politician, but I guess I was wrong on that, but that's okay.
Yeah. You can count on the fact that I was never going to say that.
I'm just kidding. But Dan, thanks for coming on. I appreciate the time. And my last thing to leave you with is hopefully you're going to run for office sometime soon within the next 10 years.
Stay tuned.
That's what we're praying for. Anyway.
Appreciate it.
You could be the next hope for us. Anyway, thanks for coming on, Dan, for conversation with Rob. I wish you the best of luck. I hope you do good things in Duval County. We definitely need you in 2020. It's going to be a tough race, regardless of who the Democratic candidate is.
But it's possible. It's possible.
It is possible, I agree. But there's a lot of landmines, I guess, in Florida, more so than other states in the country.
But I'm an eternal optimist, so I always think of the bright side. So,
I know you do. Yeah. I'm just telling you the truth.
Yeah.
All right, Dan. Hey, thanks for coming on. Go ahead. What were you going to say?
I said, no, it's okay to be a pragmatist. We need that too. We need a little bit of both.
All right, Dan. Hey, thanks for coming on. You know, I appreciate you, and you're like a brother, man.
Appreciate it.
All right, we'll talk to you soon, all right?
All right, same to you.
All right, bye-bye now.